900 years is a scarcely fathomable depth of time, and very few human endeavours or institutions endure that long. And in order to do so, you need skill, perseverance, but also moments of great good fortune. In 1666, the flames of the Great Fire licked against our walls, and if on the evening of Tuesday, the 4th of September, the wind had not died down, I would not be standing here telling you the history today. So it's a story of art and architecture, a story of science and politics, of heroes and villains, of moments of rebirth after moments where the hospital fell into decline. But I hope to show that most of all, it's a celebration of that vision of care, compassion and service that our founder had 9 centuries ago, and results in a hospital that's provided 9 centuries of healthcare free at the point of delivery ever since. To try and cover 900 years in 50 minutes is a tall order. I have approximately 3 seconds per year, and the journey will need to be rapid with few digressions, but I hope to convey something of the history and spirit of the organisation. So that disclaimer has already cost me about a decade, so let's press on. It's 1123. London has a population of 15,000, which is about the size of modern Penzance. Henry I, the 4th son of William the Conqueror, is on the throne, has been on the throne for 23 years. Despite a life expectancy of about 30, there will be some people living who remember the Anglo-Saxon rule before the Battle of Hastings, and the Doomsday Book has just been completed. There won't be Parliament for another century, and Henry's son, William Adelin, has just been lost in the White Ship disaster 2 years before, plunging England into a succession crisis and subsequently into what became, after his death, known as the Anarchy. So enter on this stage our first protagonist. Sewing pillows upon all elbows, he drew to friendship with himself those whom he had soothed with jokes and flatterings, and responded to the goings-on of the court with jocular flattery, desired to attract himself with ease the hearts of many. There he made it his business all day long to attend spectacles, banquets, jests, and the rest of the trifles of the court, and with shameless face, betaking himself to the suite, now of the king, now of the nobles, he assiduously employed a complaisance that should please them and obtain with greater ease anything that it pleased him to speak. So this is Rahir, our founder. And whilst that description sort of drips with class and ecclesiastical snobbery, you do get a glimpse of a rather charming, very manipulative, low-born chancer on the fringes of power, and who, on the face of it, is not someone who we would be remembering 900 years later, or who would have anything to do with a hospital. But that all changed in a life moment when he went on a pilgrimage to Rome, possibly connected with the White Ship disaster, and there he fell ill, possibly with malaria, and prayed to God that he might be saved, and that if he did, he would do something for the poor of London. He would found a hospital. And he recovered and was saved, and then had a vision of St. Bartholomew. And St. Bartholomew said to him, "Know me to have chosen a place in the suburbs of London at Smoothfield, where in my name thou shalt found a church and hospital, wherefore do thou boldly, neither at the cost of the building doubt thee not, direct, build, and end this work." So there are 2 things about St. Bartholomew the Apostle. First is that he displays an enviable knowledge of the potentials of the London property market for someone that never travelled north of Armenia. And secondly, he describes what might be called a robust management style. But having been flayed alive, as you can see, I think we can forgive a certain brusqueness of manner. So Rahir did found the hospital. The hospital took about 10 years to build outside the walls of London in Smoothfield or Smithfield. Before its cleansing was very foul and like a marsh, at times abounded with filth and muddy water. Rahir now lies in his lovely tomb in St. Bartholomew's the Great, and the hospital and priory were run jointly by him nearly to his death in 1143. Thanks to our amazing records, we can actually identify a patient from the time that Rahir was running the hospital. A carpenter of Dunwich by the Sea called Alfuhin, professing to himself to have been contracted and twisting in all his limbs, had prayed to St. Bartholomew. He was brought to London. He gradually recovered, first using his hands in women's work, such as the making of a distaff. I didn't write this. And then when his other limbs strengthened, hewing timber with an axe, squaring it with a chopping axe, until he was able to resume work as a carpenter. So a cure, rehabilitation, financial independence. A great result. The interesting thing about this is, of course, the town that he came from, Dunwich, is now under the North Sea. It was a prominent port in East Anglia, but has now been entirely reclaimed by the waves. And although we never like to lose a source of referral of patients, I think once they're subaquatic, we have to let them go. So at Rahir's death, there was a split in the leadership. This document is the charter from Rahir during his life to Hagno the clerk to take over the running of the hospital, and Thomas of Ossith was put in charge of the priory. But the hospital was under the control of the priory, and there was then centuries of conflict between the hospital and the priory for control, mainly of money and the ability to appoint positions. The hospital indulged in repeated bouts of Pope bothering about this, and eventually in 1223 the Bishop of London adjudicated the hospital, gave up its rights to a bell tower, but obtained crucially the absence of a priory veto over its appointments. By 1371 the bell tower was there, although its bells had to be rung only after the priories had been rung. A cemetery, a seal, and full self-governance was obtained, and this was confirmed by the Pope a century or so later, and from that date the hospital has a master, not a proctor. We know a lot of this because of this wonderful document by John Cock, the Cartulary. A cartulary is copies of all the important documents of the hospital gathered together, and this is an amazing document that tells us so much about the history at this time. Remember, this is a religious institution. The staff was the master, 8 brethren and sisters, and that's why we call nursing sisters sisters to this day. These are some of the marginalia you see in the cartulary, reflecting a lively sense of humour on the part of John Cock as he doodled away these rather wonderful figures. John Cock, incidentally, was a witness to the coronation of Henry V, the victor of Agincourt, and reported a day of great rain. We hope his successor has better luck in 2 days' time. Johannes de Murfield was a chaplain to the hospital and assembled an encyclopedia of contemporary medical knowledge. His advice goes from the sensible: the physician should weigh diligently in his mind everything that demands consideration, to be confident it will produce advantageous results. For he does amiss in prescribing a medicine of which he is in doubt as to whether it be dangerous or beneficial. We should all live by those rules today. His advice was also laconic, as seen here. Grind up henbane with the juice of mint, spread it over the forehead. If the patient doesn't sleep, he'll die. But sadly, also, frankly, disgusting remedies were in place. Particularly odious was the cure that was to take a whole lot of dead puppies and boil them, and then induce the patient to take a bath in that, I suppose you call it puppy juice. That's likely to have done nothing for the canine or human health of Smithfield. John Wakering is the next figure of note. Already when he took over, the hospital was 300 years old. He increased and better managed the hospital's properties. He was assiduous in financing the hospital. He managed to get the 100 shillings left by Dick Whittington, the famous London mayor, for relief of the poor, which he then promptly spent on a new South Gatehouse. I guess the poor must have been relieved to have such a nice gate to walk through. He also secured water pipes from the leafy hills and springs of Islington. He opened a school in the hospital precincts and attracted a number of high-status, highly educated tenants to live within the hospital grounds, increasing the income and the reputation of the place. It's probable but not definite that it is due to John Wakering that we have inherited our celebrated shield. Everything then changed. Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, and this world of priory and hospital was shattered. Then there were only 4 hospitals in London: Barts, St Thomas's, a few of you may have heard of, St Catherine, and the Savoy, which I suspect you haven't. The Savoy Hospital failed to be rescued, became a brothel, a prison, a barracks, and then burnt down. So that was what we were staring at down the barrel in the 1530s. Barts, incidentally, was valued at the 3rd wealthiest at £371. Gresham to the rescue. Not Sir Thomas, who's here, but and who founded this wonderful college, but his father, Sir Richard Gresham, petitioned Henry VIII for the city would take over the running of the London hospitals. He was refused. There was more lobbying from the city to try and take over the running of the hospitals. But by the 1540s, after the priory had been shut, the hospital, although open, had no funds and was in dire straits. They were reported to be running short of bed sheets because so many had been used as shrouds for their patients to be buried in. Just in the nick of time, in 1547, they'd managed to get Henry to refound the hospital and endow it with much of its further property, being enormously grateful to him for returning what he'd just stolen. And this was just in the nick of time because Henry died literally a few days afterwards. The new administration has now moved from the church, the ecclesiastical model, to the city. There was a board of 12 governors established with 4 aldermen and 8 common councillors. The governors appointed a matron, 12 sisters, 8 beadles, and 3 surgeons to care for 100 patients. This marks the high watermark of our beadle to surgeon ratio, which has substantially diminished in the subsequent years. This also marks the moment where we move from just nursing care and supportive care to medicine and surgery. 1547, a surgeon called Martin was paid 10 shillings to remove a bladder stone. That's the first operation recorded in St Bartholomew's. In the 1560s, the first physician is appointed. But due to the excellent management of the city merchants, Barts flourished, it became wealthy again, its buildings were repaired, and advanced care was given for the time. This man we owe a lot to, Thomas Vicary, who was the first superintendent of the hospital, seen here receiving the new charter by King Henry VIII. He must have been a political player of some skill. He survived being sergeant surgeon to Henry VIII and his three children who reigned, a very turbulent time. So one imagines that it was largely due to Thomas Vicary and the support of the city that we survived at all. So this golden age, as we emerge into the Elizabethan era, produced some really distinguished people. John Keyes, who went on to found the Medical College in Cambridge. Timothy Bright, this is interesting, wrote a treatise on melancholy, which is the first psychiatric text to be published in this country. But at the apex of all our alumni stands, of course, William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood, possibly one of the greatest medical scientific discoveries ever. He managed to do this while being physician to the royal family and also physician to the hospital for 34 years. So a consultation with Harvey. This is what outpatients was like. In the Great Hall, once a week, Harvey would sit enthroned in his purple cap and robes, and the arthritic, apoplectic, paralysed, pox-ridden, jaundice, and syphilitic were brought in one by the sisters, sometimes on stretchers. Their pulse and urine were examined, and then Harvey would decide whether it was a medical case, and he would instruct the apothecaries, or a surgical case, and he would instruct the surgeons. This model of outpatient seems to me to be ripe for reintroduction, particularly the throne element. But I don't think the surgeons will really appreciate it. These are Harvey's rules, and again reflect the real dominance of the physician at this point. So only curable patients were to be admitted with a limited length of stay. They were out if they didn't take their pills. They shouldn't lurk here for relief of only slight causes. That all such as are certified incurable, scandalous, or infected shall be put out of the house. Surgeons were under tight rein. Some would argue they should still be. They should not admit patients they don't want to treat, and they must basically ask the physician's permission to do almost anything, as per the apothecaries. So about 400 patients a year recovered under this regime, probably despite most of the treatment. This is an avocation: always let blood in cases of great distress until the patient faints. When the inmate was deemed well enough, there was a rigorous discharge process, which is a little different from today. He was presented kneeling to the physician in the Great Hall in front of the throne and waited to be pronounced cured. He then gave praise to God and the hospital staff. He was given money, clothes, and a passport and sent on his way. Again, all this was to change. If you imagine Harvey's hospital, it would be quite similar to one of the older Oxbridge colleges, slightly ramshackle old buildings with grass squares in the middle, lots of tenements, maybe people living and trading within the hospital. The governors, as the 18th century approached, wished to do away with all that and build a modern hospital. And James Gibbs, the architect responsible for St Martin's in the Field and the Radcliffe Camera, was appointed to carry out that work, and his hospital is really the hospital we see today. So the north wing, the administrative block, was built first, and then wards built in a quadrangle. This nice print here is dedicated to John Tough, the treasurer at the time, and indeed has his coat of arms as well as those of the hospital. The print is dedicated to him. This was a mistake. John Tough went bankrupt and absconded to France with £4,064 of the hospital's funds, which was an absolute fortune, probably enough to build one of the wings. So that caused a scandal and considerably delayed work on the East Wing. As you know from the Radcliffe Camera, John Gibbs loved Bath stone, the honey-coloured effect it gives, but unfortunately that crumbled in the London air and had to be subsequently replaced. Interestingly, if you visit, the one place you can see the original Bath stone is as you go through the gateway. You can see the honey-coloured stone there and the Portland stone that had to replace it. But this was built, the Great Hall, which I'm delighted to say, thanks to the hard work of our charity Barts Heritage, is now going to be subject to an 18-month, £10 million restoration project starting in a few months' time. This magnificent building was a machine to take money from rich people and then record how much money they'd given on the walls of the hospital, and it was highly effective. Let's look at some of the figures of this time. There's a few little vignettes here. John Hunt was a business as a nightman and rubbish collector, and he was the man that emptied the cesspits of the hospital. His prices were reasonable. Around the corner, from at the front of the hospital, there was William Salmon, king of the quacks, who, much to Harvey's disgust, if he'd been alive then, was selling medicines unapproved to the patients and the poor of the area. One can imagine a very, very large market for his elixir of life and a slightly more restricted market for his other product, which was anti-nymphomaniac lemonade. Barbara Adam was a barber who worked under the direction of the surgeons shaving patients. Sadly for Barbara, in 1671, she was kicked out of her job and her home for improper conduct on diverse occasions. The details are not related. Just in the corner around from the hospital, Mary and Anne Hogarth ran a dressmaking business. They have a very superior business card because their elder brother, William, about whom more later, designed it. And all the Hogarth family were baptized in St Bartholomew's the Great. So going up to the Great Hall, the governors of the hospital wanted something really impressive as you went up the stairs, and they initially wanted an Italian painter called Amiconi to produce these great canvases. Unfortunately, Amiconi was Catholic, foreign, and expensive, and what they wanted was someone Protestant, English, and cheap. And after a certain amount of lobbying, Hogarth got the job, and in fact did it for nothing, becoming a governor of the hospital instead of payment. And the result is probably still the most spectacular thing we have in the hospital, never fails to get a gasp from visitors. This is Christ at the Pool of Bethesda and the Good Samaritan, Hogarth's masterworks, which grace our hospital to this day, and are in good condition, but will be in better condition in about 18 months. Around this time, we also played a small but important part in the abolition of slavery. Jonathan Strong was an enslaved man who was brought to England by his master and was so badly beaten and abused that, as Jonathan said, I could hardly walk or see my way where I was going. When I came to Granville Sharp and he saw me in that condition, he took me into St. Bartholomew's Hospital for 4.5 months. After he was discharged from hospital, Jonathan's master attempted to regain ownership, and the subsequent court cases which Granville Sharp fought against that established the legal precedent that slavery was not legal in England, and that was a great moment in the abolitionist movement subsequently. So we now come to some 18th century, 19th century stars. Percival Pott, a real prince among surgeons, has so many eponymous syndromes named after him that I won't recite them now. A friend of Dr. Johnson and Garrick, he was the first person to report an industrial cause for cancer. This, unfortunately, to describe it, was carcinoma of the scrotum in young boys sent up chimneys naked to clean them. That gives a dark side to the world of Hogarth and what we're talking about. But Pott was the first to recognise that the ash and grit in the chimneys was causing this, and subsequently legislation was passed to end this barbaric practice. Next is John Abernethy, who really created medical education at Barts. He was a much-loved but acerbic man, a workaholic who spent his wedding day on the wards. He was famously extremely intolerant of the wealthy, worried well. He once told a well-upholstered duchess that she didn't need a surgeon, she needed a skipping rope. A Rubicon City worthy, when asked how he could cure his gout, was told to live on 6pence a day and earn it. And hypochondriacs were directed to a Dr. Robertson in Inverness, who did not exist. John Abernethy also invented a biscuit. It's a kind of digestive biscuit with some caraway in it. It's still popular north of the border. If you wish to honour this man and aid your digestion, you can get 6 packets for £13.15 on Amazon. I encourage you to do so. Next is James Paget, who was born in relative poverty in Yarmouth. He identified the cause of a roundworm infection while still a medical student and really founded medical pathology in this country. He ended up a baronet and Surgeon General to Queen Victoria, and today the Yarmouth Hospital is named James Paget in his honour. So as I said, medical education begins with Abernethy. This is a certificate that Abernethy would give to students saying they'd completed their course, and rapidly Barts became the largest medical school in London. A few slightly more odd characters. So first we have Michael Furnell, who ended up, I can assure you, as a very distinguished Surgeon General in the Indian Medical Service. He was a student at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, and the reason he's interesting is that he kind of discovered chloroform. His activities really lie somewhere on the spectrum between drug abuse and scientific inquiry. He says, in 1947, I was very much my own master there, and I used to amuse myself by taking sulfuric ether and producing insensibility. The pharmacist became alarmed and gave orders he was not to be allowed any more ether. he explored the pharmacy further and found away on a back shelf a neglected dusty bottle labelled chloric ether, chloroform. I took the cork out and smelt it. It seemed very nice, so I took it upstairs and inhaled it. I found it sweet and very pleasant, and soon produced a certain degree of insensibility. I was much struck with it not producing the suffocating, irritation and choking feeling ether did. He then mentioned it to the surgeons, and it actually was apparently used in a few operations at St. Bartholomew's. But, as ever, if you don't write up your results, you get nowhere in medicine or science. He did not, and later that year, James Young Simpson announced the discovery of chloroform anesthesia. The next is a real villain, William Palmer, a Barts alumnus, the Prince of Poisoners, described by Dickens as the greatest villain ever to have been in front of the judge at the Old Bailey. He poisoned multiple people, including members of his own family, with strychnine and other poisons. The story is as though when he was approaching the gallows, and perhaps not quite fully comprehending the process that was about to happen, he glanced down at the trap door and asked, "Are you sure that's safe?" The last is, of course, W.G. Grace, who needs no introduction. His advice to medical students was not to read too many books because it spoils your eyesight for cricket. Nursing before this era was a poorly regarded, untrained position involving much manual labour. And St. Bartholomew's Hospital was really at the forefront of trying to change that into the noble profession that it is today. So the first student nurses were started in 1877. Ethel Bedford Fenwick, matron at the hospital, was a lifelong campaigner for the state registration of nurses and was rewarded with state registered nurse number 1. Isla Stewart also campaigned for the state registration of nurses. This is a formidable figure, I think, from her photo, and a very formidable statement for someone of that era. A nurse's position to the world is that of a woman wishing for independence, willing by her own hands to obtain it and maintain it, and to have a profession owing no man anything. She founded the Barts League of Nurses, which flourishes to this day, and amongst other things, Barts instigated the International Council of Nurses, which was the first international women's professional body of all time. So the world was changing radically, although, as you can see from this watercolour to this photo, 70 years apart, they may appear almost identical. The world was changing rapidly. So in 1800, the hospital was still slightly in the dark ages. It was getting through 96,300 leeches a year from a huge aquarium in the dispensary at a cost of 7 shillings per 100 leeches. And this rather sorry-looking object was actually to allow medical students to practice trepanning, but it bears unmistakable signs of its principal use as a football, a slightly lax attitude to medical education at the time. By 1900, the world has utterly changed. Nearly 2,500 operations occurring at St. Bartholomew's with half the mortality due to anesthesia and asepsis. We see the beginnings of subspecialty ophthalmology, ear, nose and throat gynecology. By 1872, we have 676 beds, which is very close to what we have now, and very large amounts of activity going on. This is worth, as we have a large heart centre at Barts, it's worth mentioning Sir William Lauder Brunton, physician here for 33 years. He was the first to describe an effective treatment for angina, cardiac pain. And again, he did this very early in his career as a house physician. He says the pain came on as usual at 3 a.m. A few drops of nitrate of amyl were put on a towel and inhaled by the patient. The pain disappeared almost simultaneously with the other symptoms. It's interesting to note that this was his 7th choice after trying bleeding brandy, ether, ammonia digitalis, and lobelia. One hopes not sequentially in the same patient at the same time. As we enter the 20th century, we see senior doctors were still unpaid generalists, largely, who had to maintain their living through private practice or teaching. But towards 1930, Gibbs's South Block was transformed into the King George V block with modern operating theatres. And by 1936, Barts was the first hospital in the country to offer mega-voltage radiotherapy. It's also worth recording Maisie Holt, as you can see, immensely long-lived, but medical psychologist at Barts in mid of last century, who initiated the first effective treatment for dyslexia, which was then known as word blindness. So nursing changed radically as well. Nurses still had to leave the profession on marriage in the 1950s, and the rules are pretty strict and draconian. All nurses to be quiet, orderly, punctual, obedient, and behave with dignity. By the late 60s, we had the start of degree courses for nursing and a real explosion in the academic and scientific training. So, as you all know, the NHS started in 1948. And initially, Barts coped with that change from being a charitable organisation to being a state-run institution very well. There were no obvious problems. That all changed in the early 90s with the publication of the Tomlinson report, which said unequivocally that St Bartholomew's Hospital was not viable and should shut. This led to a huge campaign. And part of that campaign was to publish this letter from the filmmaker and artist Jerrick Jarman, who was then sadly dying of AIDS on the hospital walls. Sir, I have been here now for 2 weeks. I escaped to the 18th century courtyard and read in the pavilion to the sound of the fountain before retiring to the hospital church of St Bartholomew, which itself is cool and filled with the peace of time. Without our past, our future cannot be reflected. The past is our mirror. Every profession has a history, and the medical profession starts here. To shut Barts would be a crime against the past and against the metropolis, which needs its great institutions, and would be impoverished without them. Barts is my second home, and my life here is cherished. Powerful support such as this from the city, within the hospital, from our alumni, managed to save the day. And as with the incoming new Labour government in 1997, Frank Dobson, to St Bart's sainted memory, made the decision to keep the hospital open. He's rumoured to have said they treated the archers of Agincourt here, and I'm damned if it's going to have a plaque saying closed by Frank Dobson. We then had another fairly existential threat having been saved in 2006 when the Treasury announced on the 23rd of December, a good day to bury bad news, that it was not going to go ahead with the PFI refurbishment of the hospital. That again led to a huge campaign to make sure that that went through, which again was successful, and the works at Barts started in 2010. This is an aerial photo. For those of you that have been to Barts, you'll recognise the quadrangle here, Gibbs's quadrangle, but the huge building is the new PFI. And I think it is a great building because when you're in the square, you look at it and it really doesn't seem that different in scale and size to Gibbs's blocks. But you can see from the air just how vast it is. And it is a wonderful facility. And it, I think, fits in with the environment of the city around it incredibly well. It provides a light, spacious, airy, modern hospital for this ancient institution. More recently, the Maggie's Centre has been completed at Barts, a beautiful space again for cancer patients and their families. And a year ago, the Nuffield Hospital at St Bart's was completed, again refurbishing some buildings that had got into a terrible state. And it's worth reflecting that after that decision to save Barts, there has been around about £500 million worth of investment in the site. A real, I hope, vote of confidence for its long-term future, a real manifestation of our commitment. Some of those are PFI contracts on 30 years, and we're leasing the building. But if you've been around for 900 years, 30 years is a mere bagatelle. They'll be our buildings very soon. Interestingly, James Gibbs's rebuild cost, as I said, about $5,000 a block, and in today's money, that's about $5 million. So you can see although our new hospital is a lot bigger, and James Gibbs didn't have to fit in MRI scanners and CT scanners, you can see there's been a considerable explosion in the cost of providing hospital care over those 300 years. So we've changed now from a general to a specialist hospital, and one of the reasons for that is simply what kills people these days. You can see that in the UK at the moment, the two big killers are cancer and cardiac disease, and you can see that as life expectancy has increased over the course of the last century, those killers predominate over the infectious diseases of the past. And so the modern-day St Bartholomew's contains the UK's largest cardiac centre, London's second largest cancer centre. We have world-renowned endocrinology, specialist endocrinology and respiratory departments. We have around 2,500 staff, 700 doctors, one beadle, so the ratio is very different from before. And we have a similar number of beds to 1872, but of course now our focus is on specialised beds and intensive care. We have a particular significant mass and expertise in cardiac imaging, and we have the largest magnetic resonance service in the world. We have an annual turnover of about 400 million. We're part now of Barts Health NHS Trust. We're rooted in the community of the east of London like never before in our history. Our routine, if you like, population is about 2.3 million residents, but some of our specialised services are populations of up to 14 million. This is the most diverse and disadvantaged population in the country, and we owe it to them to provide the very best medical care. We hope that as successors of Harvey, we are doing well on the research front. Our cancer teams have particular expertise in breast, lung, haematology and urology cancer, and there are world-leading researchers in key areas of drug and biomarker development and precision therapy. We are an experimental cancer medicine centre, a CRUK major cancer centre, an NIHR biomedical research centre, and a RadNet centre. And we have an impressive publication record in all of those areas. On the cardiac front, we're the top UK clinical research network recruiter to trials over the last 8 years, and have raised over 40 million in grants from major charities, hosting up to 20 fellows a year and 1,000 published papers since 2020, with significant impact on national and international guidelines. I'm particularly proud, and I hope Isla Stewart and Ethel Gordon Fenwick would also be, of the research efforts of our nursing and allied health professionals. We've invested this, and that investment has paid off handsomely. We've had over 40 research fellowships with over 150 papers for nursing and allied health professionals, and again with significant international and national profile. The last 3 years have not been easy for St Bartholomew's. They haven't been easy for the NHS, and they haven't been easy for anyone. I thought it might be good just to reflect on plagues and pandemics in the last few minutes. So of the Black Death, there is almost no information in the records. The Great Plague of 1665, there's a lot, and a lot of the terms with which we sadly became familiar were all there. Zoning, social isolation, social distancing. This was not the Barts physicians' finest hour. They all fled the city. The surgeons, apothecaries and nurses were left to pick up the pieces. And these groups that stayed and looked after patients with the plague were specially rewarded by the governors. A particular hero was the matron, Margaret Blake, assisted by 15 nurses to the great peril of her life. It's wonderful that she survived and continued as matron at Barts for another 10 years until her death 10 years later. In the 19th century, there were repeated influenza outbreaks, often referred to as the Russian pestilence. In 1891, an observer found over 1,000 patients clamouring for treatment, and it was noted that particularly male patients were so alarmed that they took themselves to the hospital immediately, probably the first reference to man flu. The influenza epidemic in 1619 obviously was one of the worst pandemics the world's ever seen, and impacted badly on the hospital in terms of losing a number of staff and 2 new distinguished consultants who had memorial funds raised to support their widows and children. So now we come to March 2020. This appeared overnight at the steps of our hospital as Britain was plunged into lockdown. This slide from March the 20th shows that at that point, just taking the graph of the number of patients in hospital meant that by the 3rd of April, London would require around 7,500 ventilated beds. We had 800 in the capital at that point. And as the next slide shows, there was indeed frantic action to stop London running out of beds in days. And as part of that approach, Barts Health was asked to run the Nightingale Hospital, and as been mentioned, this was set up and equipped in just 9 days and opened on the 3rd of April. This is a photo of that facility. If any of you have been to the Excel Centre, you know the enormous size of those barns. And for those of us there, seeing these being kitted out with row after row after row of bed spaces was terrifying and awesome, just to think that they might be full of patients. Thankfully, they weren't, and the tide turned before it was needed. But we did have 50 patients admitted there, and I'm very proud to say that those 50 patients had identical outcomes to the national average. For an ITU in a conference centre set up in 9 days, that's a remarkable testament to the clinical skills of the nurses and doctors working there. So the role of Barts during COVID was to carry on doing what we did as much as we can. We served as the cardiac surgical hub for London. We kept on going with cancer treatments. We also supported the Nightingale, as I've said, and we supported our sister hospitals, particularly the Royal London Hospital, with a massive amount of staff redeployed to the intensive care unit there. It's worth us just recording that in the worst part of the pandemic, in July 21, across Barts Health, there were 835 patients with COVID in our hospitals requiring hospital care. That's 1.5 times the whole size of Barts Hospital. And there were 223 in intensive care, more than double the intensive care beds that we had going into this. This was an unprecedented challenge, and thanks to the miracle of vaccines, we don't have those numbers of patients in there today. So Barts Hospital really is a patchwork. It's also the only hospital that has a parish church in its grounds. This is St Bartholomew's the Less. And you can see here the amazing different bits of stone and masonry from the 13th to the 20th century. I've talked a lot about some of the personalities. I've talked a lot about art and architecture. But I think it's important to focus on compassion and quality of care. These 2 quotes come from 150 years apart. Charles Ward, a 24-year-old gardener in 1886. There were a great many brought in as though they had been picked up off the street, or come from some very poor home indeed. And sorry were many when the time came for them to go back, after getting well, and the kind treatment received from the doctors, sisters, and nurses, and the good food they had, to say nothing of the clean, comfortable bed they had to rest upon. He noted how some patients said they had never before received so much kindness. Fast forward to 2021, a patient living with cystic fibrosis who contracted COVID, a very hazardous situation, who received intensive care with us. All the nurses were so compassionate, understanding, and most of all honest. I felt completely safe and knew they would do everything they can to keep me stable. Because of the nurses and doctors at St Bartholomew's, I didn't become a figure added to your screen under deaths, but instead I became a more important number under recovered. So I've talked a little bit about this remarkable institution, 900 years of healthcare free at the point of delivery. You've heard of periods of greatness and periods of decline. It is astonishing to think that what would be miraculous cures to Rahir now occur hundreds of times a day in our hospital. It will be astonishing for Harvey to witness the research that we do today and to see a heart-lung machine taking over the circulation that he so brilliantly described. However, I feel in my role that I probably have much to learn from Rahir. I don't think the process of caring for the staff and patients and procuring the resources to enable us to do that has changed very much in 900 years. And I suspect that charming, flattering manipulator would cope with the Byzantine bureaucracies of the NHS just as well as he did with the court of Henry I. We've survived the dissolution of the monasteries, the Great Fire, the First World War, the Blitz, and we've survived NHS attempts to close us. As we come into the 20th century, after that very dark period at the end of the 20th century, we really have gone from despair to renewal. We've secured major investment, which will hopefully keep our hospital going for a long time in the future. But I think this history shows that you can never be complacent. There's always some threat that you haven't thought around the corner. And whilst we can do everything as a hospital to survive, what's kept us going all these years is the strength of our partnership with patients, with alumni, with the city, with our friends, and with our supporters. And if we're going to endure another 900 years, we need to keep those partnerships alive. If you're interested, just to close, a new book has just been published 2 days ago. St Bartholomew's Hospital, 900 Years, will tell you much more than I could do. And there is also an exhibition. This is an amazingly camp tableau vivant from the 800th birthday celebrations with the citizens of London thanking Rahir. But Life and Death in the Archives, an exhibition from the archives, starts in the Guildhall Yard, then goes to Aldgate Square, and is in the hospital over the course of the summer. Well worth a look. So huge thanks from me to Kate Jarman, our archivist, and to Elizabeth Radon and Andrew Greasy for their help preparing the talk. And just before we get too hung up on history and think it's all important, it's worth knowing that the most searched item on the internet is for an entirely fictional event, which is Sherlock Holmes leaping off our pathology block. I'm afraid the history of Harvey has nothing on the charms of Cumberbatch. Thank you.
Charles, thank you very much. It's very striking when you hear that story told, the importance, of history, being in a place which has both place and collegiality, but also the vital influence of individuals at various times in that history who've fought for survival or taught other people leadership in nursing and so on. You are living through a period of enormous change within healthcare. And how dependent are you on those same forces to sustain St Bartholomew's now in the next few years?
I think it's all about people, isn't it? I think the job of everyone in a hospital or in our profession is to try and appoint someone who's slightly better than they are to do your job when you've gone. I think you have to rely upon the spirit of the place in the way that you describe. And if you're running a big institution, I think you also need to get the balance right between people that can consistently do their job and people who are maybe a bit more disruptive. But as you've said, disruption can sometimes be important. And as a leader in healthcare, if you can try and balance those two types of individuals, you'll be onto a good thing. The future, I think, is going to be immensely different and might be quite different quite soon. Just last week, a study showed that an AI response to patients' questions was rated as more accurate and more empathetic than physicians. So we might we might be on the brink of a real revolution here.
Can I open the floor questions from the floor if anyone would like to ask them? Sir.
Thank you very much. It's most interesting. Can I ask you about the Great Hall, magnificent Great Hall? What is it actually used for? Because presumably it's not medically.
So, as I said, its function was always really towards entertaining and impressing people to give money to the hospital, which we still hope they will do. It has been used over the years for conferences, for functions within the hospital. The plan, once restored, is that it is now owned or on a very long lease by Barts Heritage, which is an independent body. And its, if you like, business model will be that it allows the hospital to use it, but also is able to use it for weddings and a venue, which will give us enough income to keep it from falling into disrepair again.
So I'm struck by the repeated theme of fundraising and the close relationship between the very wealthy, the concept of charity, and the Treasury having its coffers locked. And it's, whatever political system has been in place throughout those 900 years, the solution seems to have been the same. Take money from rich people and give it to the poor people. Do you feel that's a reasonable analysis, or am I being too cynical?
No, I think that was Bart's business model for at least 8.5 centuries. We still desperately need to fundraise for all sorts of things, maybe not the basics, but to provide, gold standard care instead of ordinary care. We can't do that with the funds we get from the NHS. And it has been more difficult to fundraise for NHS institutions because people justifiably think, well, you're a public body, why would we donate to a public body? So in comparison with the States, in comparison with European countries, I think we're behind the curve on exactly that process as you describe. If you go to an American hospital, it's full of this wing, all named by the donors. And I think there's still, unfortunately, a need and a role for that in this country. And I hope, with our geography, are best placed to exploit that.
Plenty of rich people around you. Anyone else? Or shall we stop and move for refreshments? And would you like, please, to thank Professor Charles Knight in the usual way?